Welcome back, folks, to Voices in AI, here with my buddy Eldad, and we're continuing our series on OpenAI. As you could probably tell, we're recording all of these in one go. We didn't feel like changing our shirts or location. Just gotta run right through them. And
We're all
today
about productivity.
all about productivity. Are we real or are we AI? I don't even know anymore. But today we're talking about one of my favorite people in AI, Ilya Sutskever, who is the chief scientist over at OpenAI and has made one of the largest marks in contemporary AI than anyone else
And
in the
corporate.
field,
In corporate history, too.
in corporate history too, second, maybe only to Demis Hassabis over at DeepMind. And he's been the protege of quite a few incredible people as well. It might be interesting, though. He has a very different, I'd say, compared to a lot of people, paths to where he ended up. I'd be curious, Eldad, do you want to share a little bit about his background?
Yeah, he is, remember, Russian by birth, but they immigrated pretty early to Israel. And then he studied there and then went into Canada to get some of his degrees. University of Toronto, he worked with Geoffrey Hinton, one of the godfathers of AI. He also worked with Andrew NG, I never know how to pronounce
Yeah.
it, from Stanford, currently at Stanford. I think he was at Stanford at the time as well. And with Google Brain. Ilya is considered one of the foremost experts on neural networks. He doesn't fully, even though he worked very closely with Geoffrey Hinton, he doesn't completely believe in the doomsday scenarios that Hinton is now. But his background is interesting. I can't remember the name of the other gentleman they worked on with AlexNet.
It was Alex.
Yeah, yes, but the surname.
Yeah, I don't remember his last name.
Yeah, it starts with a K, but that was all about kind of image recognition and so forth, and categorizing objects and helping neural networks do that, as well as he's part of the whole AlphaGo story that many of us are well aware of, because that was the first time a computer beat a human in that game. And TensorFlow. He was at Google Brain and worked with TensorFlow, which TensorFlow is now their open source thing for LLMs that they're making available to everyone. Well, available to everyone, but who knows what Google tends to do with their open source stuff.
They'll keep that open. That's been around for a while too, to help model not just LLMs, but all kinds of neural networks. You can even go test it out online and mess around with it. I actually remember in another life, I ran this initiative in Boston to get kids more into STEM. And one of the field trips we did was to Google. I actually went to Google a few times over in Cambridge, north of the city.
Oh, wow.
And
Nice.
I remember this was, I don't know, when was this? Like maybe 2016 or something. I saw this guy talking and they were unveiling or showing off this system online to mess around with neural networks and creating artificial neural networks.
Wow.
I remember back then being like, what am I looking at right now?
Yeah.
Who knew these years later? I feel like now trying to educate people on how this stuff works.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm pretty certain TensorFlow, I was talking to my wife's, who's in New York, and his kids are all in the robotics club at their high school. And I'm pretty certain that they're doing quite a bit with TensorFlow and optometry. So that, like the RoboVac thing, that it knows where it is without actually, because normally in robotics,
computer
what happens
vision.
is, yes, yeah. In robotics, what they had to do is go 3 steps forward, 2 to the right, yeah, and so forth. And this now with TensorFlow is allowing them to have robots that they can, not in a sense, program, but it is programmed to observe and react.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think it's doing that with high schoolers, who knows what people who are more experienced and professional are going to bring out.
I know. One of the, obviously AlexNet is one of the more famous ones, even though Ilya played a huge role in that, but he was a supporting role. The thing that he's probably best known for before all the OpenAI stuff was sequence-to-sequence learning, also called word-to-vec. And
What is
this
it
was
called?
like sort of the
Order to fact?
word number
Okay.
2 vec.
Got it.
And this is like a precursor-ish to the transformer architecture, but the idea was you have this encoder decoder. Encoder, you're taking one modality, you're translating that into math essentially, and then that gets decoded in the other modality or whatever you're trying to transition to. For example, translating from English to French, the OG Google Translate, that wasn't so great. That's essentially what it was doing, and what all this technology more or less does right now. It's taking your input, it's encoding that, and then it decodes it into the output that you're looking for. This
Interesting.
eventually led to Transformer and the Transformer architecture. What was the add-on to this and the breakthrough was an attention mechanism, so that the problem with the original Google Translate is it couldn't do context. So it would just like literally translate word for word. And we all know, like, depending on the context, that doesn't really work. And so the breakthrough with the Transformers was it's looking at the context of everything it's done so far to help inform what that next word or whatever it is might be.
Yeah.
So this was like the major pre-breakthrough to what now we all understand as in what we're using every day with ChatGPT.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah. The word transformer reminded me something about Amira Marathi, who was also part of the OpenAI leadership that we've covered. And she talks about some of her interviews, how she was fascinated with capacitors and what they could do to help in a project that she was working on very early in her life. And it's when you think about it, we always envision that people at Ilya's level or even at hers are almost pure theory and helping push domain forward because of where they're exploring. The knowledge is coming from being so hands-on with the details. And the other thing that got me thinking, Amir, as well, is neural networks. That's the whole exploration of kind of how the human brain works and trying to, in a sense, I'll say, digitize it, right? That may not be 100% accurate. And both of them, Ilya and Mira, speak pretty openly about their own fascination as teens and so forth, about how the brain works, right? And so that's a natural carryover into AI. And to have your chief research scientist already thinking or with that is his, I won't say foundation, thinking with it as an active part, makes you think that the ethical considerations, which seem to always get talked about, it seems inherent. If you're talking about how the brain thinks, you would hope that is morals and values are part of the fascinating part of how the hell did that evolve from our brains?
Yeah, as we talked about in kind of an earlier episode on the spectrum of conservatism and safety, ultimately Ilya is incredibly optimistic, but he is very aware and focused on the safety of these systems. He was the one who pushed for what is called the super alignment team over at OpenAI and pushed to get the dedication of resources in this area, and is really the one, I think, holding the flag in a practical sense up around the safety. And we can speculate all day about the firing of Sam Altman. We can talk about that a little later, but I think that is really his stick in the ground at the organization. And I think probably part of the reason why he was willing to give up a very like surefire career at Google or wherever else to leave and help create this nonprofit focused on AI with Sam and Greg. And depending on who you listen to, both Sam and Elon Musk were very heavily responsible for courting him to bring him over. It wasn't necessarily a sure thing.
It's hard to get somebody to leave Google and DeepMind, right? He was working with a pretty remarkable team at that place. There's a couple stories about him that I picked up on that came out of the same reading, but his involvement with AlphaGo, while is very interesting because we all know now what happened. AlphaGo beat Lee Sodal, if I remember the name correctly, the best human player in the world. But what it was is, and what Ilya is, I think one of his passion points is AI is definitely going to outmatch, right? And this AlphaGo experience showed that, right? And we're talking about something that's now years old, where it made moves that had never been seen before in human history. Its ability to compute and come up with a creative solution is fascinating. The other one that I like about him as a character in many ways is when NVIDIA released their chips, he was working at I think at the University of Toronto, and he drove down to get them. And this was one of their first, if not the first, right, super high powered chip. And they were saying that they would only allow one chip to be per person. And he loaded up his trunk somehow
Yeah.
and took that back into the projects that he was doing with Jeffrey Hinton. Joking, like, what if he hadn't done that? Where would we be? Years behind? And so he's a guy who will push limits, and we hope, because he's the research scientist, that he's approaching it with the ethics and everything in place, because it'd be interesting to see how his day-to-day impacts the company not just strategically, but more tactically on what's being operated.
Yeah, I really like listening to him too. If you haven't yet, go watch like an interview with him. He is just thoughtful in all of it. He's the type of person who will take 2 to 3 seconds to really think through his response. And then what marches out is just like the perfect communication of what he's trying to articulate in a very non-technical. If you listen to him, you wouldn't think, oh, this guy essentially speaks math fluently. You just say, this is a great science communicator. He's so good at bringing it down to that level, which I think that is one of a real sign of intelligence is, this is like a famous quote. I don't know who said it, but it's, if you can't explain it in a simple way, then you don't know it. And I feel like he really embodies that. He's really able to take these incredibly complex and difficult to understand things and break them down in a way that you can understand.
Yeah, he is actually one of the more visible OpenAI people on TED Talks and YouTube and so forth, which makes sense, right? Because a lot of his kind of research is going to be what's driving things behind the company. And then I imagine that Greg Brockman is sitting 80 to 100 hours in a week to start decoding to bring him to life. But yeah, no, he's very interesting. And when we've hinted at it, I don't know if we really want to go in depth about it, but I made the joke, he's going to be very important in corporate history, because it was him flagging things that led to the ouster of Sam Altman. And whatever happened there, it's fascinating to see that such a prominent voice within the company be the one that created that, right? Usually you would think that something that would either happen straight from a board or from things bubbling up from underneath as a mass movement kind of, not just one, not a whistleblower. And I'm not saying that Ilya was.
Yeah, so there's one important research paper to talk about here that came out right around this time. It's called Let's Verify Step by Step. And if you've used SuperSynapse before, it takes a similar idea. I call it telemetry of thought, which is the idea of, originally it was a chain of thought. It's just like, let's think step by step. You have the LLM map out the steps it's going to take. But the cool idea that they've been working on, which was not possible before GPT-4, is you have the LLM outline the steps to solve like a math problem or whatever it would be, its reasoning. And then you have a person or another LLM go through and critique the reasoning to point out, where did the reasoning go wrong? Even if it got the right answer, where did the reasoning go wrong? So that it can continue to train itself to verify those logical steps and actually get to the right answer. But it's not just important for the process of, okay, let's follow this reasoning to get to that answer. It's also in terms of alignment, because this allows us to have transparency into the actions taken by the AI, right? So I, for example, do not need to know how the brain works to be able to show someone the steps to solve a math problem. Right. I just need to outline those reasoning steps, like transparently, that in a way that you can follow to arrive at the solution using those axioms, those proofs, whatever it might be, to get to that answer.
Yeah.
So it feels like this is the way the field is moving in terms of transparency. Is we're probably not going to be able to solve the black box problem anytime soon. But if we can tie actions of an AI to what it's actually outputting as it's reasoning, then that is at least a first step.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting, that you call that out because it connects to a project that I'm working on right now with for myself and for us at SynthMinds, right? I was fortunate enough to work at Ogilvy for a period of time and some of the process documents and so forth that we have. I'm trying to train a GPT to, in a sense, use those processes, right? So that you can help with kind of the whole, what Ogilvy does, right? From branding to the actual content, ad, messaging, etc. And I could see by uploading the documents that I have that it wasn't really getting it. It kept saying could be or appears, and from what it was inferring from the information, even though it overall understood the process, right? And so I said, how do I make this easier for you? And it's just what you were saying. Hell, show me step by step, right? And as much as we are fascinated by this technology that is AI, and what he can produce because of what it already knows from crawling God knows what percentage of the internet up to April 2023 in OpenAI's case, it still needs to be trained like a child. And that is the part that we're fortunate that there are other engineers and people doing at these companies. But if you can remember that when you're struggling to get it to work, do what you want, you got to take that. Okay, we're asking it, explain it to me as if I'm 10 or
Yeah,
5, right? No, man, you're going to have to go explain what is branding?
it goes
What
both
is it?
ways.
Yeah. And that I think is the hardest part because suddenly you've got to really break down your own things that you're asking into such a simple conceptual language to help train a model. And that's a unique skill. That's not prompt engineering. That goes beyond it in my mind.
But this is going to accelerate. We're going to overcome this hurdle, I think,
Oh,
faster than we
yeah.
think, because the way this study was done is they trained this critic model to be able to point out the logical problems or the reasoning problems. And so now you can create all this synthetic data and opportunities and do that training, just have some spot checking, and it's going to continue to build faster and faster. And I think what we're going to start, the next sort of phase, another really interesting paper. I don't know if you've ever read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, but it's this idea of a system one, system two.
Mm-hmm.
System one being your quick intuition, system two being the things you have to stop, attend to, and process. Right now, LLMs are purely system one unless you hack it together. And I think what we're going to see in this next iteration is we're going to have a system two in these large language models that are able to actually stop and consider things step by step if it needs it.
Yeah, it won't just be taking a breath. It will actually be doing real work.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think just to end on the controversy here, Ilya was on the board. It's unclear whether he was leading the effort or how he was actually involved, but at the end of the day, he was part of the votes to oust Altman. And we don't know why, but we can assume there was obviously something that Altman was doing that spooked Ilya and maybe went against his sort of strong ethical code and direction. But then he flipped. I think when he saw that, oh no, if Sam and Greg leave with the company to just go be at Microsoft, that is going to do more harm than good. Like completely flipped on him, where at least if everyone's staying at OpenAI, he has some control. He can manage the safety efforts. Whereas if everyone hops ship, it's him alone without the resources necessary to continue.
That's very true.
We don't know for sure.
No. And a lot of people have speculated as well, right? Is it the play between profit and nonprofit, right? Because they were initially set up as a nonprofit. And what does that mean, right? For what they could achieve individually, if their financial is their end goal, which for many of these guys, it does not seem to be. I think they know that.
I mean, they're all wealthy already.
Yeah, exactly. Right. What's the difference between $1 billion and $2 billion, right?
Yeah. At some point, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It shifts more towards power and trying to achieve your vision.
Yes, absolutely. You do have to consider that within where is the line, and is it a new line that has been drawn? What happened between the nonprofit and its ethos and mission and the profit potential of what it could become? I personally, from reading about these guys and hearing their stories and seeing some of the interviews with them, you can see safety seems pretty paramount to them.
Yep. It does. I think what that actually looks like in practice, though, differs, especially once you get into the profit and competitive motives that they're all facing right now, because at the end of the day, and why they created this for-profit arm of the nonprofit was because they could not raise money for the nonprofit
Yeah.
to get to where they want, which is to create AGI, artificial general intelligence. And so now the race is on.
And with that, we shall leave. Thanks for tuning in.
Yes.
And we'll have another Voices in the Air for you soon.